What's up, guys? If you're new here, my name is Delton, and I'm going to talk with you about when a deal goes bad. Alright, so the reason that I was laying down just then is because I don't have a chair. It could fit in the room. I just don't have a chair yet, but that's alright. That's besides the point. The main reason of this video is that I think I'm gonna do landscape actually. Okay, so we're back in landscape mode. I'm talking to you about when a deal goes bad. So to summarize the story as quickly as possible, there was a land deal going on in the East Coast in Warwick, and it was next to the ocean, about less than 50 feet to the ocean, and everything was looking pretty intriguing. Now the property was listed on the market for 124 days or something of that nature. So I reached out to the realtor and, got a bit of the background of the property. So as much as the seller being intrigued to sell and them having a couple offers, but nothing finalizing or going through. So at this point, I'm understanding 124 days on the market. That's when we can look at it and see if there's some kind of bottleneck that can be resolved so that a deal can be made. So as far as the bottleneck goes, it was an incredible bottleneck. It seemed as though something that could be resolved fairly easy, and to some extent it was. I had communicated with my buyer. He was interested. I think I reached out to the realtor with like a goal in mind for a price that would work, and I had a price aligned with him way around like maybe July or September, August, something like that, right? Early in the fall season. And at that point, we were just discussing price. We weren't even in contract yet, but I had made the offer price to him that he was kind of like, a bit more negligible to. And the realtor was like, you know what, like that's way too low. I think I made an offer for like 40 and it was listed at like 124 or something. And it was only about like 5,000 square foot plus another five, so 10,000 square foot total. And, or it was two adjacent lots. But here's the thing, in that county, a lot has to be 10,000 square foot, and only the 5,000 square foot was sold, but the lot next to it was also owned by the same seller. So it would be able to be not abutted, but it would be able to be merged, So that was fine. That like made sense. That lined up. And then when the seller and the realtor rejected the 40,000, I was like, okay, let's see if we can do this around like, let's say, I think it was like around 70. So they were kind of fine with 70, and I thought it was kind of tight at 70, but from 124 to 70, I felt like that was like not really a strong discount, but at least something that seemed like tangible and realistic for a buyer to be interested at. So once I started learning more about this property and I learned more about what the deal was doing, the thing that is so important is knowing like what the structure of the deal is, like the infrastructure of the land, the infrastructure of the approvals and the permits that go into the land, especially for each county, because just because there's land there, it doesn't mean that you can build on it right away. But it wasn't just that it was land. Here's the catch. It was land with wetlands, so it had a little bit of wetlands on it. And as you know, if you're familiar, you can't just build on wetlands. Really, if it's a large amount of wetlands, you'd have to fill it. So you'd have to do an infill, and that's expensive. So the hope was that there would be no infill, and to my luck, there wasn't. Now, once I was like looking for other properties, just single family houses, multifamilies, and things of that nature to do flips with, I met I came into contact with a buddy of mine who is a buyer. I came into contact with a buyer as well, and he is like super into flips. He's actively working on some flips right now, some new constructions actually, multifamily constructions. So shout out to my buyer. And what we began to work on was looking at the details, delineating the facts, and basically cutting through anything that would be bottlenecks so that we could build on the land. Because once we found out that there was wetlands, we looked at a couple maps when I marketed the property. Once it was like under contract around 70, 75 or something, I had plenty interest of buyers. Some buyers had already knew of the property. Some of the interested buyers or developers, investors, one of them had actually knew of the property in such detail that he had a map of the wetlands that had been delineated. So there was a map showing exactly where the wetland lines were, where the boundary lines were, and we went forward from there. So after that point, we notated that there was wetlands. I contacted, the CRMC, which is the Coastal Resource Management Council of Rhode Island, of the state, and then from there we went to the office. Me and the buyer made sure that the CRMC could approve the build on next to the wetlands on the property, and from there it took like 3 months for CRMC to even process the paperwork and review. And then once we knew that we could build on the property, even though there's wetlands on surrounding it, then we had to get a survey. The survey took about 2 months, but through this time there was constant communication, like, hey, like, there's wetlands there, it's going to be hard to build around wetlands. We're waiting on the CRMC to confirm if it's in their jurisdiction to permit on, or if it's outside their authority of confirming the property being built on, or the property having accessibility and permissibility to build on. And from there, that took like 3-4 months. It took about 3 months. From there, the survey took about 2 months or so. Even though it was expedited, it took about like a month or two for the survey to be completed. But constantly through the deal, there was constant communication every other week or so. So like a week would go, we would update about what the coordinations were, because there's like delays with the processing, communicating with the CRMC, with the town, with retrieving the survey. And my buyer at this point, he had put in $3,000 for the survey to be made so that it could show where the property would be built. It was the proposal of the property. I had communicated and probably emailed maybe up to 10 emails from surveyors to the town, as well as the CRMC, so that we can make sure that once the survey is made, that they can review it to approve it. And from this timeline, that's already about like maybe 6 months from even when the offer was submitted, right? But within that time, we went from 75, then we followed through with another 50 or so, then we were at 65, and I had wanted to get it down to like 50, as far as like all the the more intensive labor that it would take to deforest the property and to build around the wetlands, and the time that it took for us to have the paperwork process. So even though the realtor had countered, or he declined the 30-40 offer, we were just around, I think it was like 55 or 65, where the seller had signed the amendment. We had an amendment signed twice, one from 75 to 65, and I think we were like trying to get to 55 at like the best price possible. And then the seller kind of went missing. After the seller went missing, not from us, but like had took a trip. There was like some family things going on, someone of her family had passed. And then from there, after she had returned after a month, at this point it's like going to May, right? So from April to May, she was away, and then she returned back in May, and the realtor confirmed. He said, once the seller gets back from Florida, will be good to go to do closing. And the worst thing of the deal could happen. The seller just backed out completely. And from there, um, it was just chaos had broke loose. You know what I mean? Um, the realtor had then refused to return the EMD, and he refused to communicate with the seller. I reached out to the seller. The seller had refused to continue forward with like selling the property so that the buyer could close on it. And even though we were like very clear and straightforward with communication, and the contracts are solid, no place in the contract that you know within the written agreement that they had anything saying that if the buyer could not perform, that the EMD would be held. Like there was no contractual obligation for the EMD to be retained by the seller. And because we were very forward with our communication, we were consistent with communication, and all our timelines showed that we were actively pursuing the property so that we can make a sound judgment of closing. And the realtor himself was all right with that. He was communicative of that, and he aligned that to the seller as well, so that May was the time that the closing would be ready after the survey had been completed, after CRMC had reviewed it, after we understood the requirements from the town. So May was the definite timeline that it had that it was intended to close. And once the seller backed out, that's when my buyer decided to pursue legal obligation or legal. I don't know what the word is, but he decided to pursue it in a legal matter because the realtor had retained his EMD with his brokerage company, and the seller refused to sell, even though we were clear and communicative. And the timeline for the property to close was May. And when the seller returned, that's when the seller decided to change her mind or her intention, her decision with selling. So then he decided to pursue it in legal matter. So hopefully that legal matter goes smoothly. Hopefully it goes like proficiently, super, super good, because really it's at the seller's, it's not at the seller's discretion, but it's because of the seller's decision to not sell that now the seller will be sued, because as the contract was, there was an EMD deposited, but it didn't say that the EMD would be held, or if it didn't close on the expected timeline originally agreed to, that the EMD would be retained. There was no language of that. There was no miscommunication. There was clear communication throughout the entire timeline that the property didn't close on, and then there were amendments and addendums. There was addendums made for, price changes and updates towards the proficiency that the land would be valuable, and that we were taking on the property with the value that it would cost to make it into an abode for someone, or a multifamily. So with that in mind, advice is to, make sure to do due diligence, obviously, before and during, and to watch out for realtors that are just like not the best at what they propose themselves to do. Sometimes realtors are just, and people are humans, so it's not really a realtor versus this. It's just sometimes some people won't be as professional. They could be professional, but then when things aren't cookie cutter, and as that was, the land had wetlands, and we had to work through that for like months, like 6 months, for just making sure that everything was ready to go, that the survey was ready, that the CRMC was going to review the survey, and that it was going to be approved, and then it'd be ready to close on, because it would be like profitable to invest into it. And though the communication was solid all the way through to May, once May came around and it was really the time, like it was ready to close on, everything was ready, the finance was ready, the survey was ready and completed, the CRMC was on board, and they had already reviewed and communicated with me and the buyer multiple times. Everything was ready to really close, and then that's when the seller decided to back out. So now my buyer is pursuing legal matters against the realtor and the seller, So we're wishing the best for my buyer, that he can retrieve his EMD, and more likely, maybe there's some kind of way that the court will then judge in the favor of the buyer, since everything was made clear and communicated, and that he can close on the property that he was ready to invest in, because obviously it's a beautiful opportunity to have a home next to the ocean. So that's my story of the of when a deal goes bad, and I hope you enjoyed. And if you're not subscribed, make sure you hit that subscribe button, like the video. It means a lot to me. I know this video isn't super edited, it's more of just like a vlog, but as I progress, the videos will become more edited. I'll have more time to, play with Premiere or Adobe video editing, those types of things. So anyhow, I hope you enjoyed, and I hope to see y'all again in the next video. Alrighty, take care. Have a good night or a good day wherever you are in the world, and thank you for watching.